Hello and welcome back. Let's continue learning about various ways that we can troubleshoot in the AWS environment, this time focusing on elastic load balancing troubleshooting. And also over here in the console, we will go into EC2 and click on our load balancer down here. So the first thing that we want to look at is what if load balancing is not occurring between instances in multiple availability zones? So what do we do here? Well, we want to make sure that enable cross-load balancing has been selected. Now, if you've already created your elastic load balancer, you can enable that by clicking on your elastic load balancer and under description, scrolling down here to find cross-load balancing and then check to make it enabled. Next, let's look at if instances are healthy but are not registering as healthy with the ELB. So here under instances, if you add an instance to your elastic load balancer, we'll add this one here, you're going to have this status here, and it's going to run health checks to make sure that the instance is healthy. But what happens if this never turns from out of service to in service? Well, what you want to do is always check your health checks to make sure you have selected the proper ping protocol, ping port, and ping path. So I can look here under health checks and I can see how this is set up. So when I click on edit health checks, I can see that this has been set up for a ping protocol TCP across port 22. But what if my security group that I have set up for this particular EC2 instance isn't allowing port 22? It's only allowing, let's say, port 80 because this instance is only going to serve web traffic. Well, if I'm pinging port 22 and the security group doesn't allow that, then the EC2 instance will never show up as healthy and it will never serve traffic to it. So here I just need to change this to 80. I can click save, and then the instance, given enough time, will become in service because it then pinged port 80 and it now is in service. So always pay attention to the ping protocol, ping port, and ping path if you are having issues getting your EC2 instances to come in service. Next, let's take a look and discuss that if an ELB is configured to listen on port 80, but traffic is not making it into the instance that belongs to the elastic load balancer. Well, what happens here is that you may have mistaken the listeners for the security group. When you go through the setup process of an elastic load balancer, one of the first things that you see here is the listener configuration. Now, it looks a lot like a security group, but it isn't. Later on in the configuration process, you do then select a security group. So both the listener has to be set for port 80, but also the security group has to have port 80 open as well. And if you ever have an elastic load balancer that has already been created and you're not quite sure what the security group has been set to, you can always click back on description here, scroll down to security groups, and select the security group and double check to make sure that it has port 80 open. Next, access logs on web servers show IP addresses of the elastic load balancer, not the source traffic. So what would you do if you are running an application and you are collecting logs for incoming web traffic, but all of the logs are saying that the traffic is coming from the elastic load balancer, not from the originating host? Well, it's a very simple fix. We'll just go back to our elastic load balancer section here. Select your load balancer, then under description, all you have to do is click on configure access logs, enable access logs, provide an S3 bucket to store the access logs in, and then click save. And then you'll be able to go into the logs to view the IP addresses of the originating host as opposed to the elastic load balancer. And last, what if you aren't able to add instances from a specific subnet to the elastic load balancer? So let's say that I have an elastic load balancer and there's an instance that I want to add, but when I click edit instance, it doesn't show up on the list. Well, what you always have to make sure is that the availability zone that the instance is in has to be added to the list of availability zones down here. So right now I have 2 availability zones added, but let's say that I had an instance in availability zone US East 1C. Well, that EC2 instance would not show up here because I have not added that particular availability zone down here. So that would be how I would go about solving that particular issue. So again, that was just a quick summary of some of the issues you may face when dealing with elastic load balancers. And with that, we will conclude this lesson. Thank you for watching. You may now move on.